What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be discussing the Warden tank. So the Warden tank is one of the better classes in the game right now for tanking. It's probably falling just behind the Dragon Knight tank there in terms of the popularity and overall utility of having a Warden tank in your raid group. Now, they do fall behind the Dragon Knight tank just because Dragon Knights happen to have Engulfing Flames, which is a pretty nice debuff to have, especially if you have magic DPS in your group. But Warden tanks can still perform very, very well and clear pretty much all pieces of content in the game as a tank. They do bring a different sort of group of abilities to the table when it comes to Dragon Knights. While Dragon Knights are kind of focused in more on pure tankiness with a little bit of utility here and there, Wardens kind of focus in less so on tankiness. They're a little bit more fragile than Dragon Knight tanks, but they focus in a lot more on overall group utility instead, and also bring a couple of unique buffs to themselves in order to kind of help them succeed as a tank. So just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build yourself. Now, as a support role, you will be expected to have a lot of different sets on hand, and you'll be expected to have a lot of different skills ready to kind of adapt to the situation at hand. That's just kind of the nature of being in a support position. So I will be talking about a lot of different sets that you can potentially run, as well as other skills that you might want to also pick up before you kind of dive headfirst into that Trials tanking. So like I said, as a support role, you kind of have to be very, very flexible, and that does involve having flexibility of skills and flexibility of sets as well. Now, unlike DPS, obviously tanks don't really have a rotation, so instead I'll be discussing a little bit behind the philosophy of tanking, kind of my approach to tanking, and anything specific that I feel like you should know about playing a Warden tank compared to like a Dragon Knight, Shork, or a Templar tank or something like that. So we'll discuss that towards the end of the video. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first, as usual, with our gear. So starting off with our Monster Helm set. So this particular setup that I have right in here is pretty much like my default go-to tanking setup for pretty much everything that I need to use a tank for. So that's 4-man content and 12-man content. So unless I've been, I'm told otherwise, or I know that I don't necessarily need to run these sets, this is typically what I just fall back to when I know I need to tank, but I'm not sure kind of what the other tank is wearing in the trial, or I don't know kind of what we're going for in terms of like maybe we're going for a specific achievement in a dungeon or something. So for Monster Helm, I have Lord Warden. It's a very, very good set, very, very safe set to use. So it's a very generic set. You can pretty much use it under pretty much any condition, and it's going to be good no matter what. So this comes from Imperial City Prison, so you do need to have access to the Imperial City DLC in order to use this set here. This pretty much gives you just a lot of resistances. It's pretty much as tanky as a Monster Helm set as you can get. The advantage of running Lord Warden is that the two-piece also provides a little bit of resistances to everybody within 8 meters of you. So if you have a lot of stamina DPS, this basically helps boost their own survivability as well, which is pretty important overall. If your DPS are staying alive, that means they're able to do more DPS. Dead DPS don't do any DPS, so having Lord Warden is pretty nice for overall group survivability. If you're an off tank and you're just kind of floating around the group, then the Lord Warden proc will help buff everybody within that group as well. And the resistances do stack on top of Major and Minor Ward and Major and Minor Resolve, so you will have a lot of additional resistances if you are going to be running Lord Warden here. Now, you do have some other Monster Helm sets that you can run here. So starting off first, we're going in alphabetical order here. Bloodspawn. This is a base game set. You can get this from Spindle Clutch 2. So the one piece is pretty much useless. Stamina regen in general is not a very good stat to kind of invest in as a tank, just because while you're blocking, your stamina regen drops all the way down to 0. But Bloodspawn is here for the ultimate generation. So when you take damage, you have a 6% chance to generate 14 ultimate and increase your resistances by 6450 for 6 seconds. So we really don't care all that much about the resistances. Yes, it's a nice boost, but we should not be relying on Bloodspawn for our resistances. Instead, we're using Bloodspawn here for that ultimate generation instead. So it's just a very, very large amount of resistance ultimate that we're getting. If we're lucky, we can get it every 6 seconds or so, but this just allows us to get Warhorn up faster, which allows us to have greater major force uptime, which in turn gives the group more DPS. So that's where Bloodspawn kind of falls into play. Bloodspawn is a very useful set overall in trials where your survivability is not necessarily going to be an issue. For example, Craglorn trials. That way you can kind of focus in more on getting your Warhorns out faster, getting more major force uptime. Already talking about Lord Warden. We have Stonekeeper. So this is a new Monster Helm set. This comes from Frostvault from the new Wrathstone DLC. It's a pretty interesting set here. So the one piece is pretty much like a try enchant. So it gives you both stamina, magicka, and health, just at a lower overall value. It's about half as much. And then the two piece, when you block an attack, you gain a charge stack up to 1 stack per second. And when you get 6 stacks, you release the energy and you restore 5350 stamina and magicka, and you heal for a base 5350, but that does change depending on healing received, healing done sort of things. After you release the charge, you can't regain any more for 14 seconds. So basically this is on a 20-second cooldown. So this is nice because it restores your stamina, magicka, as well as health as well on the 20-second cooldown. So just very nice overall resource sustain here. If you're running roughly 20k magicka and stamina, then every 20 seconds you're gaining about a quarter of that back. You're gaining back 25% of your magicka and stamina there. So pretty nice overall. It is a little bit dependent on being able to block attacks. So if you are in a fight where you're not getting attacked very often, then obviously the amount that you sustain overall, like your regen per second is going to be a little bit lower, but it's still a very nice set to hold on to. Symphony of Blades is another Monster Helm set that is from the new Wrathstone dungeon. So this comes from the other dungeon, Depths of Malatar. So the one piece adds 2% healing done, which helps out your personal healing. And then in two piece, when you heal an ally who is under 50% of their primary resource, you grant them Meridia's Favor, restoring 23-25 magicka or stamina, whichever one is higher, every second for 6 seconds. This effect can occur once every 18 seconds. So this is a pretty interesting set, very similar to Stonekeeper, just on somebody else. Now it does rely on you to kind of heal an ally, so you will need to run a healing ability as a Warden tank, which is pretty okay. Things like Minor Lifesteal will also proc Symphony of Blades here. So this is very nice to help your DDs sustain, your DPS to help sustain their rotations. That being said, though, if you are running 12-man content and you're the only one running Symphony of Blades, it really does end up losing a lot of power because you can only proc this on one person every 18 seconds. You have 8 DDs, we're assuming you have 4 support roles, 2 tanks, 2 healers. So 1 out of every 8 every 18 seconds is not very strong. Symphony of Blades is best used basically on multiple support roles. So if your other tank is wearing Symphony and you have 2 healers wearing Symphony, that's 4 out of your 8 DPS are going to be able to get the Symphony of Blades every 18 seconds. So pretty strong overall, but it's really, really powerful when you use it with multiple people at once. Thurvokun is another Monster Helm set that you're going to want to pick up. This comes from Fang Lair, so you do need to have access to the Dragon Bones DLC in order to grab this set here. So the one piece adds max health, always very useful. And then the two piece, whenever you take damage, you summon a growing pool of bile for 8 seconds, and enemies in this bile take 498 disease damage every second and are afflicted with minor maim and minor defile for 4 seconds. This effect can occur once every 8 seconds. Pretty much, this is used as an AoE minor maim, which can be very helpful because Wardens don't have a native source of minor maim, unlike Dragon Knights that have Choking Talons as sort of an AoE minor maim. So Thurvokun is very nice here for those trash pulls where you have a lot of ads coming in and you want to reduce the damage that your friends are taking. So you just throw on Thurvokun, and because it procs every 8 seconds and it lasts for 8 seconds and it procs 100% of the time whenever you take damage, you pretty much are guaranteed to get 100% minor maim uptime on everybody around you. So very, very nice to have here for trash pulls, whether that's like in trials, so Maw or Halls, or in 4-man content like Black Rose Prison. So those are kind of the Monster Helm sets that I personally like to keep on hand and kind of swap out here and there. Actually, no, there's one more. Earthgore. I missed Earthgore here. So Earthgore is a pretty nice burst heal set. So the 2-piece, when you heal a friendly target, and that does also include yourself, that is under 50% health, you conjure a pool of quenching blood underneath them, which chokes up one enemy placed effect instantly and heals all friendly targets in the area for a base 30,000 health over 6 seconds. This effect can occur once every 3 to 5 seconds. So this is a very, very strong burst heal. So if you want to compare this to Stonekeeper, which also provides a heal, a base 5350 heal every 20 seconds, this pretty much provides almost twice that. That being said, the cooldown is almost twice as long. It's 35 seconds long. So that's just something you want to keep in mind here. But when it does proc, it pretty much heals you and everybody within the Earthgore AoE for a base amount of 5,000 health every second over a duration of 6 seconds. So when you have that Earthgore proc going, it's a pretty nice burst heal. So you'll see this used very often in Cloud Rest and Asylum in instances where you need a strong burst heal. Yes, the 35-second cooldown does suck, but it is still a very powerful set to hold on to as a tank, particularly in the mini trials. That the burst heal from Earthgore is just something that you cannot really ignore here. All right. Now moving on to our set. So I'll talk about the two sets that I have on here, and then we'll go over sort of replacement sets that you're going to want to pick up. So Ebon Armory, this is a drop set. It's a heavy armor set that you can get from Crypto Parts. So you do want to have this on the body. There have been conflicting reports as to whether holding Ebon weapons and swapping them between both bars, basically called the Ebon bug. So when you swap bars, you momentarily don't have the 5-piece active, so everybody's health drops down a little bit. But then when you swap to your actual bar, your max health is back up. So everybody basically sees that small drop in health every time you swap bars. So that's called the Ebon bug. I'm not 100% sure if it's fixed yet. I've heard that it has been fixed. I've heard that it has not been fixed. I would just stick with running Ebon on your body pieces. That's either the armor or the jewelry pieces. This is going to be one of the most useful sets in the game, one of the most useful utility sets that a tank can wear because of that increase in max health. This basically allows your DPS to focus in a little bit more on speccing into raw DPS. They don't necessarily have to put points into health, for example, in order to kind of get more survivability. So even though the set bonus only says it adds about 1100 health, this is affected by all your modifiers, so it actually ends up being a little bit stronger than that advertised 1118 max health. So very, very nice set to hold on to. You would typically see at least one tank having Ebon, especially in progression style guilds. The other set is another very, very powerful set, and it's pretty much been a staple for tanking ever since it has been released, and that is Alkosh. So Alkosh is a medium armor set that comes from Maul of Rakaj, so you will need to have access to the Thieves Guild DLC in order to grab this set. Now on first glance, it is a medium armor set, so you would imagine that it is not a tank set, yet it is a DPS set, and in some instances it is. So you get weapon crit, minor slayer, weapon damage. Not very useful stats for a tank, but the 5-piece is where it really shines, and it's why Alkosh is used as a tank. So when you activate a synergy, you send out a shockwave that deals a certain amount of damage over 10 seconds, but the secondary effect, it reduces the physical and spell resistance of any enemy hit by 30,010 for 10 seconds. And this is a unique debuff, so this will stack on top of Major Breach, Major Fracture, Minor Breach, Minor Fracture. It'll stack on top of their Crusher Enchant. So Alkosh is the strongest debuff in the game right now that can stack on top of those named debuffs. So that's why Alkosh is so strong. As a tank, you're also getting plenty of synergies. You're getting orbs, you're getting shards, you're getting your conduits because you're right on top of the boss. So having Alkosh on a tank is very, very powerful. It's pretty much, like I said, the strongest debuff set in the game right now that can stack on top of other named debuffs. So Alkosh, definitely a set that you want to have on hand as a tank. Pretty much all progression guilds, all score running guilds, pretty much every single PvE trials guild has their tank running Alkosh. Now, there are a few other sets that you're going to want to pick up. Again, as a support role, you do need to have a lot of flexibility with the set that you're able to run. Examples would be for Ebon, you can only benefit from one set of Ebon at a time, so you can't double up on Ebon, in which case it's pretty much a waste of a 5-piece set for the group. You could be using a different 5-piece set which provides more utility overall. So here are a couple of sets that you're going to want to have on hand here. Akaviri Dragonguard is the first set. It is a heavy armor set that comes from Eastmarch, so you can buy it off guild traders or you can farm it yourself. So the 5-piece reduces the cost of ultimate abilities by 15%. So this pretty much gets your Warhorn up faster, gets you higher major force uptime, increases the overall DPS of the group. Very nice set overall. Definitely something you want to pick up. There are a few unique sets that are quest rewards from Eastmarch. I believe you can get a sturdy belt and a sturdy gauntlets from quest rewards, either from Delves or from just the storyline quest that's in Eastmarch. So you can already cross 2 off the list pretty easily just by completing those quests, and everything else just kind of comes afterward. There is also a unique, a named reinforced shield drop, which you might want to pick up from a Delve boss. Let's see if I can find other sets here. I have a lot of sets here. So I talked about Ebon. Jailers Tenacity is another set. So this is a dungeon set that comes from Moonhunter Keep. So you do need to have access to the Wolf Hunter DLC if you want to pick up this set here. So whenever you lose 7,000 or more health in a single attack, you gain Major Vitality for 5 seconds, increasing your healing with Seed by 30%. So kind of a niche use scenario. You do need to lose that 7,000 health all in one go, which is not terribly common. You'll see this sometimes in, let's say, Asylum. You might see that. You definitely see this in Cloud Rest. But doing 7,000 health or so, if you think about having, let's say you're running 35,000 health, 7,000 health is equal to about 20% of your health. So you basically need to get hit for about 20% of your max health in a single blow in order to get that Major Vitality bonus. There are easier sources of Major Vitality to get, or I should say more consistent sources. For example, you can just run Major Vitality potions. You can have somebody run Bone Surge, and you can use the synergy that way. That's a little bit less reliable than the Major Vitality pots, but it's a little bit more reliable than Jailers in certain scenarios. But it is definitely a useful set to have on hand. I've used it in Cloud Rest and I've used it in Asylum, and I've liked having that additional Major Vitality. Just makes the healer's jobs a little bit easier to heal through Baneful Mark in Cloud Rest. Let's see here, what other sets? There's a lot of different sets here I need to go over. There might be ones that I don't have on hand. Nope. Don't need that one, don't need that one, don't need that one. Plague Doctor. So this is a very selfish set that you should still pick up in case, there's really no other set that you can really run. So the 5-piece just adds just straight max health. So this is a heavy armor set that you can get from Deshawn, so you can either farm it or buy it off of guild traders. So again, this is a very, very selfish set. The 2, 3, 4-piece are pretty much identical to Ebon, but the 5-piece is just pure raw max health for yourself. So you do have a couple of abilities that do scale off max health as a Warden, so it is nice to have that option there as a Plague Doctor. But again, it's, as you can imagine, it's a very, very selfish set, so not necessarily ideal in all scenarios. But in those fights where you need to be a little bit more selfish, Plague Doctor is always a solid choice to go for. Already talked about Alkosh. Let's see here. War Machine is the final set that I want to mention here. So War Machine is a medium armor set that is dropped from Halls of Fabrication, so you need to have access to the Morrowind expansion in order to grab this set. So very similar to Alkosh, you would think that medium armor, it's not really a tank set. And again, max stamina, minor slayer, weapon damage doesn't seem like a kind of a tank set there. But the 5-piece is a little bit unique here. So it's one of the only sources of Major Slayer. So when you use an ultimate ability, you and your closest 2 allies gain Major Slayer for 10 seconds, which increases the damage you deal to dungeon, trial, and arena monsters by 15%. Now, Wardens do have a fairly cheap class ultimate. They have Healing Thicket, or I believe the base is called Healing Thicket. Secluded Grove, so either Healing Thicket or Enchanted Forest, which costs 90 ultimate to cast. So pretty cheap ultimate overall. So if you're running 4-man content, War Machine on a tank is actually not that bad of a choice, especially if you're running 1 tank, 3 DPS sort of 4-man content groups there, because that way you'll always be able to give at least 2 DPS. Will always be able to get Major Slayer that way. So for 4-man content, I highly recommend checking out War Machine there. A couple of other sets that you will find uses in pretty much like a handful of fights. Worms is going to be useful for Asylum off tanks in hard mode. And then Yorvold's Guidance is another set that you might want to pick up, if I can find it. Yorvold's here, just for the duration in your major minor buffs. You don't really apply damage shields as a Warden. This is more for increasing the buff that you give out to both yourself and everybody else around you. So those are 2 sets that you typically won't see being used all too often as a tank, but they do have some niche uses, particularly Worm on the Asylum off tank in hard mode. Now let's go over weapon traits, jewelry traits, everything that we basically kind of need to know for traits and enchants. So for armor, there's pretty much 2 schools of thoughts when it comes to tanking and armor traits, and I fall in one camp and other tanks fall in the other camp, obviously. So I personally like to have Infused on my large pieces and Sturdy on my small pieces. Other tanks, a good example of this would be Leofa, for example, who plays on EU. He prefers having all Sturdy pieces. Neither option is necessarily wrong, they're just different styles of gameplay. So like I said, as a support role, you have a lot of flexibility when it comes to sets, skills, and that also just follows along with enchants and traits that you have on your armor and weapons and jewelry. So I like Infused with Prismatic enchants, and then I like to have sturdy max health enchants on my small pieces here. I do still have a sturdy shield though, even though the shield is considered a large bonus. So I have the sturdy shield there. Again, you can run sturdy on all your pieces instead if you'd like. That's the second popular camp for tanks there. And again, it's sort of kind of two fields of thought here when it comes to small pieces in your enchants. I like max health, just to stack a lot of health. Other people like to run prismatics, just all prismatics on everything in order to basically maximize the amount of magicka and stamina that you're getting. You will end up losing a little bit of health, but for those people, it's worth it to gain that little bit of extra stamina and magicka that way. Now for jewelry, for traits and enchants, again, very similar to your armor, you have a lot of different options when it comes to traits and enchants on your jewelry. So I have 3 of the more common traits that you'll see. So Triune, which basically acts as a prismatic, so max magicka, max stamina, max health, really, really useful to have here. And then I have Harmony, which increases pretty much the potency of all your synergies. So your healing, your resource return, your damage, and your damage shield strength is increased by 35% for each Harmony jewelry piece that you have. So it's really nice to help out your sustain. Basically, you can pop an orb, you can get a shard, and you get a little bit more resources that way. So really nice trait there to have. Then you have your classic robust or healthy jewelry trait, just straight up max resources. Always very helpful to have on hand. There is one other jewelry trait that you might want to consider running, and that's going to be Infused, which basically improves the potency of your enchants. So that is one other potential option there for jewelry traits. Now for enchants, you have a few options as well. You have 3 primary options and a 4th option that is used a little bit less often, but is still very powerful in the right hands, in the right build. So Shield Play is one of the most common enchants that you'll find. Basically reduces the cost of your block, which helps out your stamina sustain. The second enchant that I like to run is going to be called the Reduce Feat Cost. This basically reduces the stamina cost of your abilities. So again, just help out your stamina sustain a little bit. And then on the opposite side, the third enchant that you'll most commonly see is going to be the Magicka Regen Glyph. This helps get your magicka back. Magicka is pretty much the resource you're going to be using for pretty much almost all your buffs. So nice to have the additional magicka regen. So regen glyphs are another very popular option for tanks. Now the 4th jewelry glyph that I want to talk about, again, not used very often. It's used on certain builds more often because it has that synergy with it. And that's going to be potion cooldown glyph. So those reduce the cooldown of your potions by 5 seconds. So if you're an Argonian, one of your racial passives is Resourceful, which returns 4,000 health, magicka, and stamina on every single potion that you drink. So basically gives you some additional resources every time you drink a potion. So the idea behind running an Argonian tank is you pair that with Infused potion cooldown glyphs. That drops your potion cooldown from 45 seconds all the way down to, if you have 3 infused potion cooldown glyphs, it actually drops it down to 21 seconds instead. That does mean you're drinking more potions more often, which eats up into your gold supply very quickly because you're just using up more potions that way. But your sustain is going to be absolutely astronomical if you decide to go that route there. So that is one other kind of enchant option there that you're really only seeing be used with Argonian tanks. You could use it with other races, but it's most commonly used with Argonians because of that synergy with that resourcefulness passive. Now for our weapon, we have our Alkosh is our front bar and back bar. So I have a sword and board on our front bar, and then we have an ice staff or lightning staff on the back bar, and I'll go over that in a little bit later. So for our front bar, we have a Decisive one-handed. So it doesn't really matter what you have. It can be a sword, dagger, axe, mace, doesn't matter as long as it's a one-handed. You have Decisive here for the additional ultimate generation. And then we have a Drain Stamina Poison, which drains stamina and it restores stamina to you for 6 seconds. So 238 every 6 seconds on a 10-second cooldown. This can proc off of light attacks, heavy attacks, and weapon abilities. So this is actually going to end up being stronger than an Absorb Stamina enchant on average with the amount of stamina that you get back. So Drain Stamina Poisons, you can make that by using Blessed Thistle. I believe it's Blessed Thistle, Mountain Flower, and Columbine. So you just use that with Alkosh, and you happen to get your Drain Stamina poisons there. So that is definitely a nice poison to go for. If you don't want to run this, then you can run something like an Absorb Stamina Enchant, Absorb Health Enchant, and more Selfish Glyph. You would not be running Crusher just because Crusher is actually going to be in your back bar. So in Wrathstone, one-handed enchants were cut in half in terms of overall potency. So you should want to activate Crusher on your back bar, your two-handed bar, rather than your front bar there. And then on our back bar, we have an Ice Staff. I like Ice Staves just because Ancient Knowledge gives me additional block reduction, both in the cost and the amount that I can block. So I just like having that additional block passives there from Ancient Knowledge. But you can go with the Lightning Staff as well, or you can go with the Bow. So I'll kind of go over each of them. So the Ice Staff for me is probably going to be the safest option. It's going to be the tankiest option because, again, of that Ancient Knowledge passive boost there. Lightning Staves are helpful if you have a lot of stamina and DPS in group. Just basically, you can run Lightning Blockade, which helps off-balance uptime. It's very important for stamina DPS to have a lot of off-balance uptime. So having that extra Lightning Blockade really helps out with off-balance uptime. And finally, you have the Bow. The Bow is going to be for very advanced users, very experienced tanks in groups where you want to run a little bit more DPS as a tank. You're more of an off DPS tank rather than an actual full tank that way. But that is an option there. I personally do not recommend running a Bow if you're just starting to learn. You will see it being used most often when on tanks that are pretty much in those score running guilds, Symbolic, Hodor, Mechanically Challenged. Those are the places where you will see a Bow backbar. More often you will see either an Ice Staff backbar or a Lightning Staff backbar instead. So that is pretty much all of our gear stuff. So now we can go ahead and talk about our character sheet. So I am a Nord. Nords are going to be the best base game race for tanking right now. They get, I need to double check this real quick because I keep forgetting whether it's 1500 or 2000. They get 1000 max health, 1500 max stamina, and whenever you take damage, you gain 5 ultimate every 10 seconds. So that's really one of the reasons why Nords is so powerful. More ultimate gen, faster Warhorns, more major force uptime, greater group DPS. Then you get 3960 physical and spell resistance, which just helps out your overall survivability, your overall tankiness there. There are a few other races that you can go for, though. I've already mentioned the Argonians. So the Argonians get, I believe, 1000 max health, 1000 max magicka, and they get the resourcefulness passive. Plus, they get 6% additional healing done, which helps out your self-heal. So Argonians, that resourcefulness passive, very nice overall for sustain. Another option for tanking race is going to be, if you have access to this, the Imperial race. So you do need to have access to the Imperial Edition in order to use the Imperials. But the Imperials get 2000 max stamina, 2000 max health, and then they also get 3% cost reduction across all their abilities. So that does include things like ultimate and cost of blocking and dodge rolling and things like that. And they also get 333 health, stamina, and magicka back every time they deal direct damage. This helps out their sustain a little bit there. So Imperials have a lot of sustain. They get more raw stats than the Nords, but the Nords do get the additional ultimate generation, gives you faster Warhorn uptime. Out of those three races, I would say that the Nord and the Imperials are probably going to be on the two top. They're going to be better than Argonians overall. Argonians are more beginner friendly with the resourcefulness passive, but once you learn how to sustain on a tank, you're better off running a Nord or an Imperial instead, just because of the faster Warhorn uptime. So remember that the 3% cost reduction from Imperials does also affect your Warhorn, so your base cost is dropped down by 3% to 242 rather than 250. Now for our attributes, I have 40 health, 14 stamina, and 10 into magicka here. The general rule of thumb that you want to kind of shoot for is you want to shoot for at least 35k max health, and then you always want to make sure your stamina is higher than your magicka. Now as a Nord, that's pretty easy to obtain because you have 1500 additional max stamina and you don't have any additional max magicka modifiers. But if you're an Argonian, for example, you have 1000 max magicka, so you might need to shift some more points out of magicka into stamina, so you might go with like 4, 40, 20 rather than the 10, 40, 14 that I have here if you are an Argonian, because you do have that 10,000 additional max magicka there to play around with. So your attributes might differ a little bit depending on your race, depending on your specific kind of sort of enchant setup, but this is a safe distribution to go with, 10, 40, 14. Now for our Mundus Stone, we are going with the Atronach for the additional magicka regen. Again, all of our buffs use magicka, so we just want to have more magicka regen so we can get magicka up faster, so that way we can use our buff abilities a little bit more often. Now, I'm not a vampire, but you can be a vampire if you so desire. You get 10% additional magicka regen as a stage 2 vampire, and you get some a nice damage reduction passive when you are stage 3 and above, which are both very nice passives to hold onto. You do end up taking more flame damage, which is not really that big of a deal because you are a tank, so you already are pretty much close to, if not at, the resistance cap. So it doesn't really affect you all that much. Most people consider it to be a fair trade-off, getting that 10% magicka regen and the undeath damage reduction passive in place of taking a little bit more flame damage instead. And then for food, we have purple food, so we're running max resources across all three, so max magicka, max health, and max stamina. Now going over our skills, so we do have several flex spots here, so I will be going over all of your options for flex spots. So starting off with our sword and board bar, we have Pierced Armor as our taunt, Heroic Slash, Polar Wind, Balance, Shimmering Shield, and Enchanted Forest. So out of these abilities here, Shimmering Shield would probably be considered a flex spot overall. Then on our back bar, we have Inner Rage, Leeching Vines, Blockade of Frost, Netch, Gripping Shards, and Aggressive Warhorn. Out of these abilities here, Gripping Shards is going to be a flex spot as well. So you do have one flex spot for a total of 2 flex spots. You have 2 flex spots overall, one on each bar, so overall 2 flex spots to kind of play around with. So you definitely want to keep your taunt. You definitely want to keep Heroic Slash for the minor maim and minor heroism. You want Polar Wind. This is your self heal. You want Balance here. This gives you your Major Ward, Major Resolve, as well as help out your Magicka Sustain. You do give up some health, but you should be getting plenty of heals from your healers, so not really that big of an issue. Now, Shimmering Shield, this is useful for when you are fighting against enemies that shoot out projectiles. You basically get some Magicka back and you gain major heroism. So this is probably the most consistent source of major heroism in the game right now, Shimmering Shield. But if you're fighting an enemy that doesn't have projectiles for you to absorb with Shimmering Shield, you do need to kind of swap this ability out because now at this point it's pretty much just eating a spot here. Now it's not necessarily completely useless because with the Frozen Armor passive you do get 500 additional resistances while you have it slotted, so not entirely useless, but you might as well swap this out because you're not really going to be using it all too much. So you can swap it out with something like Absorb Magic, which basically gives you a little bit of additional block reduction in both in the amount you can block and the cost of blocking. It's going to be a pretty small bonus overall, but it's still better than nothing. In terms of class abilities, if you need a little bit of additional movement speed, you can run something like Deceptive Predator or Bird of Prey for the additional Major Expedition if you would like. Not entirely completely useless. It's very useful in certain scenarios, for example Cloud Rest if you need to move around a lot, but it's going to be, again, very niche use. You can run Ice Fortress instead. Ice Fortress also gives you Major Ward, Major Resolve, very similar to Balance. It also gives you Minor Protection, so that basically reduces the damage you take by 8%, so a little bit of additional damage mitigation that way. But if you are running Balance, there's really no true reason to run Ice Fortress aside from that Minor Protection. But if you want the Minor Protection and you have access to the Sigil Order skill line, you can just run Temporal Guard in your front bar instead, because this will give you Minor Protection while it's slotted there. If you do decide to run Ice Fortress instead of Shimmering Shield, you don't necessarily need to run Balance then. You can run something like Deep Thoughts if you have access to the Sigil skill line. This basically gives you health, magic, and stamina back. So you can run Deep Thoughts and Ice Fortress instead for Sustain if you so desire. Other potential flex options here: Ring of Preservation for sort of instances where everybody's stacked. It gives everybody minor protection, which is nice to have. Classic examples of where you'd use Ring of Preservation would be like Assembly General in Halls of Fabrication and during Execute phase. So very, very niche use there. Overflowing Altar is another very popular option to run as a Warden tank, mainly because you do give out minor toughness with maturation. So it does proc off of minor lifesteal, which is provided with Overflowing Altar, but typically speaking you will have a healer run this instead of a tank, because it does have a cast time associated with it, so you don't necessarily want to be caught, trying to getting hit with a heavy attack while you're channeling this. Bone Surge is a very niche skill to use here, so it just basically gives you another synergy and gives you major vitality to anybody who activates the synergy and up to 3 other people around them. Pretty nice to have. Very niche use in Cloud Rest primarily is where you're going to see this being used, maybe in Asylum too, but mostly it's going to be used in Cloud Rest to kind of combat Baneful Mark. energy orb. It's actually a fairly decent heal even as a tank, but it's just more for the combustion synergy, so you can give back resources to your other healers, to your other tank, to your DPS in general, just a way for everybody to get some additional resources back that way. Echoing Vigor for another self-heal. Then if you need something to be purged, you can run Efficient Purge to kind of get rid of any sort of negative effects on you. Now, in terms of ultimates, I've already talked about Temporal Guard as a potential ultimate replacement, but you can also run Reviving Barrier for 10% additional Magicka regen here. The barrier is also pretty powerful as well. You can also just run your Bear ultimate as well. This will just give you a nice 12% regen from the Flourish passive, so a little bit more than the Magicka aid passive, plus you don't have to necessarily farm for Assault, or I should say support class 9 in order to get the passive. So this is another option there if you just want straight for the Magicka regen. But I like to have Enchanted Forest here because at the very least I can get a little bit of additional heal this way. It's not a very strong heal, but it is still something, especially because the ultimate is so cheap to run. Alright, so that is all the skill stuff. So now let's go ahead and talk about our CP points. I do think I need to readjust them here. So the CP cap is 810, so it has not changed between Murkmire and Wrathstone. So that gives you 270 points to put across each of our 3 different constellation types. So here under the green CPs, again, I do have to readjust them. I have 64 in Arcanist and 49 in Tenacity. Then I have 61 into Shadow Ward. Then I have 48 into Tumbling, I believe, and then 48 into Warlord is my typical tank distribution. Now you can shift a few more points into Shadow Ward if you would like. You can take a couple points out of Arcanist, put them in a Shadow Ward. You can drop this down, for example, to 49 and just dump those points in the Shadow Ward. Kind of up to you if you want to do that or not. Now, for our blue CPs here, the most important nodes that you're going to want to pick up are going to be Blessed and Elfborn. The rest of the CP nodes are really focused in on DPS, so you can really more or less ignore them, or you can put them into more stamina-oriented or Magicka-oriented CP nodes. So, for example, you could do something like 31 Precise Strikes. You can do like 25 into Piercing, 25 into Piercing, do 32 into Mighty. Something like this would be acceptable. But the biggest ones you want to get are Blessed and Elfborn. Blessed for the additional healing done, so for your self heals. Then Elfborn for the additional crit heals from Polar Wind. So 75 and 81 are the 1% just below that of 100. So you can push these up to 100 if you would like, and that would give you another 70 points to play around with the remaining nodes. And then finally our red CPs. So as a tank, you will have different CP distributions compared to DPS and healers because you are taking different sources of damage. Generally speaking, you do want to go for a more balanced approach, although there are some fights where you're going to want to sort of more focus in on one specific type of damage. This particular CP setup is going to be very good for pretty much all the pieces of content in the game. 81 Ironclad, 61 Thickskin, and 64 into both Hardy and Elemental Defender. So now that we have talked about pretty much all of our CP, all of our build stuff, let's go ahead and talk about the philosophy of tanking. So tanking, you pretty much have 3 roles, 3 jobs to perform as a tank. First one and foremost is taunt the enemy. And the second one is obviously stay alive. The third one is buff and debuff. Those are your 3 jobs. I put them in order of importance. So obviously, make sure you taunt the enemy because you don't want them to be running around killing your friends. Make sure you're staying alive because if you're dead, well, you kind of failed job 1 then, and so everyone's going to die around you. And then once you can reliably do that, 1 is pretty easy to do. It's just keep a taunt up every 15 seconds. Not that hard. 2 requires a little bit of additional work. You might need to play around a little bit with your attributes, your CPs. You might need to play around with your skills, learn the mechanics, work with your healer to make sure that they know what to anticipate in terms of large damage spikes. But once you get 2 down, your job pretty much becomes 3. Buff and debuff the enemy, debuff the enemy, buff your friends. So that's kind of the philosophy behind tanking. The most important thing is to learn how to survive first and then focus on debuffing and buffing. You can't buff and debuff if you're going to be dying every 30 seconds or something like that. So that's kind of the general idea behind tanking here. So obviously the most important buff you can give out is going to be Major Force from Warhorn. So you want to try to get Warhorn up as fast as you can. That's why we were running Shimmering Shield. That's why we have Heroic Slash for the minor heroism. That's why we're Nord, so we can get faster ultimate, and that's why you might be running certain sets like Bloodspawn for those faster ultimate generations so you can get more Warhorns out. But beyond that, there are a few abilities that you're going to want to keep track of and want to try to maintain as best you can. The three that I have on my back bar are probably going to be the most important outside of your taunt, obviously. They want to maintain Leeching Vines because that is going to help out your sustain. So under the Green Balance skill tree, you do have a Nature's Gift passive. So unlike Maturation, which procs off of any heal, Nature's Gift only procs off of heals with the Green Balance ability. The best one for a tank is going to be Leeching Vines. You can use something like Enchanted Growth, but that's a little bit expensive to run. Budding Seeds is also another potential option as well. It's a little bit cheaper than Leeching Vines. But Leeching Vines does apply minor lifesteal, so it not only heals whoever is hit by Leeching Vines, but everybody else around them. It gets a slightly small heal as well from minor lifesteal, and that does help proc the Nature's Gift, which helps out your sustain overall. So you do want to make sure you're trying to keep Leeching Vines up at all times. Now, the problem with Leeching Vines is sort of the targeting. It's a little bit difficult to target just on yourself. You might need to kind of shift your perspective a little bit, so you might need to like shift your camera over a little bit. Remember that blocking is 360 in this game, so you can basically keep your butt to the enemy, and as long as you're blocking, you can still block. The only exception would be the Pinnacle Factotum during his sort of palm thrust mechanic, his simulacrum strike mechanic. But other than that, you can, as long as there's nobody sort of directly in front of you, Leeching Vines will always go on top of you. You can also try to point your camera down. I've had some success doing that as well. But you want to try to maintain Leeching Vines for that Nature's Gift passive. The other two abilities on the back bar. Netch for your stamina. This will continue to restore your stamina even while you're blocking. So, if I have anything that can use up stamina real fast. So when you start running out of stamina and you're blocking, your stamina regen goes all the way down to 0. So I'm just going to use up all of or as much stamina as I can get here. Okay, so now when I'm blocking, you'll notice that my stamina is going up, and that's from my poisons. But now my stamina is not moving up at all, and that's because I am blocking. Now, if you're blocking on the Ice Staff bar and you happen to have the Trifocus passive, you're using Magicka instead, so you will get some stamina regen. But if you're on your Sword and Board bar, you won't get any stamina regen, unless you have your Netch. So your Netch will restore stamina to you while you're blocking. So very important to try to maintain your stamina resources that way by running the Netch. And then the final ability is going to be Blockade. Blockade will help proc your Crusher Enchant that is on your back bar, and so it's very important to try to keep Blockade up to keep that Crusher uptime going. Now, if you're running the bow back bar, then obviously it's going to be Endless Hail instead, but you just want to try to make sure to maintain that weapon ability, Endless Hail or Blockade for the Crusher uptime there. It's very important to maintain that, because otherwise you're not really providing any sort of Crusher, unless you're running Crusher on your front bar, which is going to be at half your strength of your back bar Crusher. So that's just something you definitely want to keep up as much as you can. But beyond that, everything else is pretty much staying alive as best you can. Now, I do have a handful of videos on the stream's archive playlist where I play as a Warden tank. So if you want to check those out, just go on to the playlist there and try to search up Warden tank perspective. And I should have at least 2 or 3 recent videos from a Warden tank perspective you can check out and kind of take a look at how I approach tanking as a Warden there. There really aren't many Warden tanks that I can think of off the top of my head that stream regularly. Maybe Leofa is probably the only one I can think of that plays Warden tank on a semi-regular basis. So it's a little bit difficult to kind of explain tanking without actually showing you guys tanking. And unfortunately, Warden tanks are not quite as common as you would think in endgame content because of Engulfing Flames on Dragon Knight tanks. So that is pretty much it for this build video. If you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. Hopefully you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.